I'm at InfoSec 2024 with Matt from Armortext. Hi, Matt. Firstly, Armortext, cool name.
Yeah.
What is it you do?
We are a secure out-of-band collaboration tool. We're used by critical infrastructure as sort of their virtual safe room when their network communications can't be trusted. So we're used by critical infrastructure industries, utilities. About 70% of the U.S. electric grid is powered by a client of ours, as well as banking, healthcare, manufacturing, stuff like that.
So essentially, when people get hacked and their comm systems are compromised, it's being able to do that instant response without the attacker being in the room with you. So
and incident response, legal, executive, anything that's a critical operation. So we don't replace the Slacks and Microsofts of the world. We're adjacent to that from every one of our clients.
That's really cool. So I'm guessing so that kind of stops people needing to use things like Signal and WhatsApp for that kind of ad hoc out-of-band communication we all WinSat, but you see now and again, right?
It's changing because that has been what most people default to. But regulations have really been shifting quickly around that. And if you're subject to regulations, like banks getting fined and stuff for using it. So yeah, the regulators are really creating a barrier for using the tools that a lot of cyber teams have relied on in the past on the consumer side. So sort of an emerging market. It's evolving as we talk. It didn't exist 3 years ago.
It's certainly an interesting space. Now, I would imagine being in kind of the space that you are, you'll see kind of various different cyber attacks taking place. So kind of what are some of the kind of big issues that companies are facing? What are some of the risks out there at the moment?
So a lot of the risks that we're saying, everybody knows the standard cyber risks. Everyone knows about those. What we're seeing a risk right now is actually where regulations are being put in place, but they're not communicating or refining what the expectations are for the company. And so a lot of what we're talking, like NIS2, the latest regulations coming down with the NIS2 directives, we're actually writing a letter to the EU regulators right now, encouraging them to further refine recommendations around what kind of architecture would satisfy those requirements. Because they leave it a little too open-ended, and so you get a lot of ad hoc stuff that turns out not to work in the kind of scenarios that they need it for. Either it's creates a liability, or it's actually compliant but not the security that they need.
Yeah.
So we're really pushing for regulatory bodies to wade into the debate more and talk about the kinds of architecture that would actually satisfy the laws that they're passing, as opposed to just sort of letting everyone figure it out for themselves.
And not necessarily going as far as providing definite reference architecture, but kind of ideas of this is what we were thinking when we wrote these requirements.
Exactly. Like NIS2's, I think it's Article 21 says, out-of-band communications are an essential part, should be an essential part of your incident response plan. But then in a whole other article, they talk about end-to-end encryption being great for protecting out-of-band data, but they don't connect those two. They don't say, hey, end-to-end encryption would be great as part of your out-of-band tool, and things like that. So it's not like they can say a certain product is good or bad, but they can specify what they mean by pulling those things together in a more cohesive, approach for the CISOs of the world.
Yeah, rather than people having to flick back and forth, trying to find where the dots are.
Or if they don't, then
if they are connected.
Yeah, if they don't connect those dots, then they think they're secure and they think they're compliant when it turns out one of those two things isn't true.
Absolutely. It's interesting with compliance. Something that I've been kind of reading a lot about recently is kind of AI and large language models and GDPR. There's a lot of people that are saying, oh, GDPR is going to have to be part and parcel rewritten now that AI is around. Your thoughts? Do you have any kind of experience in that area, or would they? To be honest, I'm not sure they would.
I think GDPR, the frameworks for those things on the privacy side, I think they're sufficient. I think there just needs to be more clarity around what they mean by those things, and regulations evolve as lawmakers interpret them and apply them more. And I think that it gets kind of back to that same point. I think a new tech doesn't revolutionize and throw out regulations and start all over. I think they need to further clarify what the intent of what they meant, was around those things. And that's
And on the flip side, I think technology companies need to embrace that as well. I think, especially with AI and the push for large language models,
they really do.
People are very keen to go to market and not as keen to map data flows.
They rush to market, rush to adopt because there's money on the table, but they ignore the regulations. The U.S. is probably worse than the than Europeans on that side. And that's one of the reasons we're here, is because European markets are much more further down the road in that discussion than US counterparts are. So
absolutely. Kind of maybe not necessarily your bag with incident response, but kind of a lot of conversation I've been having today have been around insider threats, insider threat programs, and there's always, especially here in Europe, that balance between respecting privacy of our end users and security. How do you think companies can kind of strike that balance, or what's been your experience?
I think privacy versus security aren't antithetical, right? I don't think it's a mutual, like one or the other. If you use the right technologies and open up the conversation to explore new technologies, we're a startup. So what we have is a patented end-to-end encryption model that a lot of people don't even realize can be used for the kinds of applications. And so I think awareness around what you can use, and not so much a focus on compliance being the ceiling, but setting it as a floor. Right? We are compliant, yes, but let's explore, because the bad guys don't care if you're compliant. They'll use whatever tools they can.
Security.
Yeah. So you can maintain both of those things if you think outside the box of tools that perhaps you've been used to using in the past. That's kind of how we approach it.
So basically, to take a step back and actually really think about what you want to achieve.
What's the outcome?
Rather than
I have this box that I need to check.
Control tick, control tick.
Well, and in the U.S., a lot of times compliance is the ceiling. It's like we're trying to get there, as opposed to understanding what it takes to lay that as a foundation and then some. Right? That's the world we live in.
Something I've always found quite interesting around compliance being a journey rather than an endpoint destination.
Right. Yeah.
Because we're never done with security, are we?
Bad guys aren't. Yeah,
like they're never done with.
The auditor is not the bad guy here. It's the actual hackers.
The actual bad guy is the bad guy.
Yeah,
that's a great quote. I like that.
You need to have security that addresses the actual bad guys, not auditors.
Speaking of bad guys and ransomware, everyone's discussing it, and loads of governments, US, UK, Europe, are all like making noises around banning ransomware payments, making it illegal for companies to pay.
Right.
It's a big thorny question. There's no easy answer, but do you have any opinions on that?
I mean, I don't think it's a challenge that will continue to plague everybody. And the thing is that ransomware payments themselves are becoming, it's evolving. The entire ransomware process is evolving to where it's now more about exfiltrate and extort, as opposed to just lock down your data and wait for payment. And so by setting sort of hard lines around what a company can and can't do legally, I think you create a situation where the company can't do what it needs to do to actually react to the hack. Because what if your data is on the dark web being sold, and other kinds of things that they're doing now, as opposed to just being locked down and waiting for them to give you the key to do it.
Exactly.
So I mean, I don't think there should ever be things made illegal, or legal versus illegal in that kind of space, because the bad guys will always figure out a way to use that against you. I mean, like we've seen in the US, hackers are now filing complaints with the SEC when their victims don't notify the SEC ahead of time.
I saw that just before Christmas that started, right?
Yeah. So I mean, any law that you put around a company is something that only that company has to abide. Hackers don't. Yeah. And so they'll figure out how to use the laws against their companies if they can.
Absolutely. So, and I think it's one of those things, as we mentioned with kind of the rules and regulations and things, is that all these things seem like a great idea in a vacuum of a policy.
Sounds good at the time.
Sounds good at the time in a policy vacuum. However, when the plan encounters the real world, there's that phrase, right?
You get punched in the mouth. Yeah, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On that note, it has been great to chat to you.
Likewise.
I wish you every success and Armor Techs at the show today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.